Welcome back to Proxymer, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about something that a lot of newer players of Craftworld Eldar sometimes are thrown by, which is how to play against faster armies. And this can include a lot. The truth is, a lot of armies can play a very fast game where they have a lot of mobile units. They can secure flanks very easily and move very fast. But the thing is that Craftworld Eldar can often do the same thing. So sometimes it's a little difficult to play against your mirror. That is an opponent that can be just as fast as you are. For example, if you go against a Dark Eldar player who has a lot of speed, it might throw you for a loop because you're used to dealing with enemies that don't have as much mobility. So maybe you don't know exactly how to play against that opponent. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go into how to play against faster factions than you. And there's a couple tricks that you can keep in mind, and a couple of just general rules when playing against faster factions that will help you out. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over which armies are actually faster or just as fast as us. We're going to be going over why faster armies are more difficult to deal with and what they excel at doing in general. We're also going to be looking at a few tips and tricks when fighting faster opponents and just general rules as to what to do when you're going against somebody with a lot of fast moving units or just a faster faction in general. And lastly, I'm going to show you some examples of how to set yourself up for success against those faster factions within the first couple turns of the game. So basically the first battle round. So, which armies are actually faster or just as fast as Craftworld Eldar? Because remember, Craftworld Eldar is actually a very fast faction. We have a lot of, kind of stratagems and units that move very quickly and can reposition quickly across the battlefield. And to be honest with you, few other armies can do what we do. So, the armies that I think can kind of do what the Craftworld Eldar do in a way are as follows. The first, of course, is our Dark cousins, the Dark Eldar. They're very fast. They have numerous ways of getting around. We have the Tau, the young naive race, who, honestly copied a lot of stuff from Eldar, I think, but that's another story. Harlequins, Tyranids. Of course, the Tyranids are winning all the tournaments right now, and they're very fast. And then certain Space Marine factions, bikers, drop pods, etc. So when we talk about the Dark Eldar, the reason why the Dark Eldar are so problematic for us is because they have really fast transports and infantry. Their transports are extremely cheap. They can afford a lot of them. Their stratagems that they have increase their movement, allow for better reinforcements. Basically webway strike in a way, but a little bit different. And they're very hard hitting, but fragile. So they have a lot of firepower that may be kind of intimidating to look at turn one because their transports are so cheap. They have the ability to shoot out of their transports. So they have a lot of firepower available to them. And they love to secure the flanks, swing around your army, and surround it. And this can be a problem for us because we generally have bigger models with larger profiles that are a little bit harder to hide behind terrain. Next, we have the Tau, which personally I've had the most trouble with when I started first playing Craftworld Eldar. These guys were my pretty much antithesis. But most of their infantry is actually pretty slow. Aside from their jetpack units, Tau Fire Warriors, things like that, very slow units. They're not going to be moving that quickly. They do have transport options, but their transports aren't really as fast as Craftworld vehicles. But the real problem lies in their crisis battle suits that can move very quickly, come in as reinforcements, deep striking in often, and striking pretty much anywhere they wish. And oftentimes, a Tau player will run several units of battle suits and attempt to surround your army in a corner or something like that, and basically just have the whole field to himself while he sets up fire lines to basically destroy anything that comes within line of sight. So this can be extremely difficult to deal with. They also have extremely potent weapons that can melt a variety of targets with equal ease. The Cyclonic Ion Blaster for blasting light infantry. They have fusion weapons, fusion blasters, I believe they're called. Yeah, they're fusion blasters for melting tanks, stuff like that. So they have a wide array of weapons that can just melt almost anything that we have on the field. Then we have the Harlequins. These are extremely fast, probably one of the fastest factions in 40k, along with the Dark Eldar. And they can advance and charge in the same turn, so they can pull off insane charges from across the field. They have stratagems and abilities that allow them to attack and then jump back to safety. So, for example, the Curtain Falls allows them to basically jump back into a transport after they're done assaulting, or Virtuosos of the Webway allows them to actually go back in strategic reserve. So imagine a unit of Harlequins coming out via Webway strike, hitting an enemy unit of yours, destroying it, and then going back into reserve to do the same thing the next turn. Extremely frustrating and extremely hard to fight against sometimes. It does cost command points, though, so just keep that in mind. And they have very hard-hitting close combat. Great damage mitigation, usually, in the form of invulnerable saves and reduced range. Then when we look at the Tyranids are the army that is absolutely dominating right now in the competitive scene because of several reasons. But one of the main reasons is because they're so fast and they can get to places they need to go very quickly. Flying Hive Tyrants are able to jump in, shoot a unit dead, and then get back to safety. How it was written before the nerfs, was that the Hive Tyrant could basically jump back into reserve and essentially just disappear and you wouldn't be able to shoot it. So that was a little bit problematic, obviously, but now it's that he just gets to jump back, make a move back to safety. Still very effective, still can put him out of line of sight, so extremely annoying in some cases and devastating. And they have a lot of high movement infantry and lots of reinforcement options. Warriors, for example, are very strong units that aren't very expensive, and you get a lot of biomass for what you pay if you're playing Tyranids and you're using warriors. I hear there's some nerfs coming up, but to be honest with you, the rumors don't look strong enough to really affect the Tyranids being competitive in tournaments. I think they're still going to be pretty much dominating, which, I mean, obviously for us is a big problem, right? I was trying to work on a video on how to combat the Tyranids earlier last week. I've had a few games against Tyranids. Now, granted, I'm not playing the top tier competitive players in the world here, or even in the state, when I'm playing Tyranids. But, you know, they're good players. They use a lot of competitive choices, and I've had trouble. Let's just say that. I've had a lot of close games. I managed to win a couple of them, and I've also managed to lose a couple of them. So, you know, it's difficult, though. But I think in general, Tyranids can be beaten with the right strategies and tactics. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys kind of what's worked for me. As far as, you know, fighting against Tyranids, I'll talk a little bit about that when we go over our examples. But yeah, Tyranids very fearsome, very fast, and very scary this edition, and more so than ever. So Tyranids are definitely one of the faster armies in 40k now, and can definitely give players a lot of trouble. And lastly, we have Space Marines. Good old Space Marines. Probably about 60 to 70% of my games are against these guys. No, I'm just kidding. It used to be that way, but it's a little more diverse now in my own group. But, you know, certain Space Marine factions can, in fact, be very fast. Biker factions can be very fast. White Scars, for example. Drop pod factions that use a lot of drop pods, or jetpack heavy armies can all be very quick, and can actually surround you quite easily if you're not careful and if you don't have a plan on how to get out of it. So, for example, if they get turn 1, they move up to surround your army, or surround pockets of your army. Well, that's going to be unfortunate, because usually what's going to happen is they're going to just control the battlefield from then on. So, and they're usually pretty tough. I mean, these are, you know, Marine equivalent enemies. You know, they have great toughness, great armor save, and stuff like that. So, believe it or not, factions like this that utilize fast-moving units or drop pods or assault troops can be very devastating if played correctly. And what that means is that they, use their speed and mobility to lock down the flanks, use their toughness to weather your return fire, and then basically close it down on you and make sure that you can't get out of your deployment zone. And that can really suck if you don't know how to get out of it. So those are kind of the armies that I can think of off the top of my head that are basically really fast. There's a couple of other factions that have fast things, but on a whole, they're not very fast, which is why I didn't include them. Imperial Guard, for example, have a few fast units, but mostly they're just not that fast. Same thing with Necrons. But why are faster armies more difficult to deal with? And what exactly do they excel at doing? And I touched on it a little bit when I was talking about the factions, but basically what fast armies are really good at is locking down the flanks. So faster armies are typically more difficult to deal with because they can respond more quickly to your threats, and they can move out of trouble more easily as well. A lot of Craftworld Eldar's redeployment shenanigans are a little bit less effective against these armies because they might have, reinforcements, or they might have fast units that can just redeploy themselves during turn one with their own movement. And this can really mitigate a lot of the things that we can do with redeployment and things like that. And also, fast armies really excel at dictating and controlling engagements, especially on the flanks. And especially because they're faster, they're going to get the first strike on you, and you're going to have to respond on them typically. Now, we are fast as well, so that plays to our advantage as well. We're not a slow faction. We're not going to just sit there and wait for the enemy to come to us. But there are kind of a few tips and tricks that you can utilize when fighting faster opponents that will help you in your games. The first thing is when you're going against things like drop pods or any kind of reinforcements that may come in turn one or whatever, you want to screen your units with troops to prevent your opponent from getting prime reinforcement positions. If you know your opponent is going to send in some drop pods, for example, you want to set up your troops in a way that prevents him from actually getting the first strike on important stuff. So you don't want to lose 2 fire prisms to Stern Guard with Meltas. You just don't want to do it, right? And there's been some situations where if I didn't position my Rangers correctly, that's exactly what my opponent would have done. And I probably would have lost the game right there because he had a lot of tanks to deal with. So you want to make sure that you can screen out those important models so that they don't get killed first turn. Or, to be honest with you, just hide them, right? Hide them well so they don't get killed. It's a little harder to do with drop pods, but yeah. So the next thing you want to do also is you want to be able to control the flanks so that your opponent doesn't force you into either the middle of the board or the corner of the board to just be surrounded and picked off. Because then your opponent has control of all the objectives, and you're not really going to be able to do much except shoot at a couple of units per turn. And again, your opponent's dictating the whole battle from that point, and you're not going to win. It's going to probably be a landslide victory in your opponent's favor. So you don't want to play passive. You don't want to hide in your deployment zone either, because this will give the initiative to your opponent, and he's going to be able to do whatever they want, right? Whatever they want to do in the game, that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be moving to objectives, capturing, killing the units of yours that reveal themselves when they want to with their entire army. Fast armies can be extremely difficult to deal with under these circumstances. So the best way to play this is actually to be more aggressive with your models. So if you realize you're fighting a fast army and you see that he's setting his army up on the flanks, a lot of his power on the flanks, then what you have to do is you have to also deploy on the flanks in particular. So basically what I like to do is I call it a strong flanking maneuver. I maneuver my strongest units on one side of the board, and I essentially push up from there, capture that flank, and then flip the table on the enemy. So I'll show you how that works. But basically what that does is that secures one side of the board for you so that you have more room to maneuver and he can't surround you as easily. And there's a few other things you can do, but basically, I'm going to show you some examples of what I'm talking about looks like, because it's a little hard to explain just talking to you guys. But I'm going to show you some examples in just a second of ways in which you can set yourself up for success against faster factions who want to dominate the flanks and basically surround you in games. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So for our first scenario here, we have a very common scenario. Now, these green and red triangles might not mean much to you, but basically just think of it like this. Those green triangles over there, let's say we're going against Dark Eldar, right? Those would be raiders in their army. And yes, Dark Eldar usually utilize reserves, so there's probably more in reserve. But they're right now hiding behind terrain in their ruins, very typical for a first turn deployment on any standard board with obscuring terrain. And you have your units behind terrain as well. Now, I have chosen in this game not to have as much reinforcements as my opponent. And there's a reason for this. Because I want to utilize all my units turn one to be able to take one of his flanks away from him. So essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to set up 3 units and 3 units on the board. And basically this is just to kind of be prepared to redeploy to whatever side is more beneficial to us. So for example, if he had more units on the left or more units on the right, we could kind of dictate where we want to redeploy our units. That's why I have them in 3s, so we could use the Phantasm ability to redeploy to the other side and basically take him, maybe not by surprise if he already knows we have it, but at least take one of his flanks away from him when we redeploy those units. So as you can see, I've redeployed. This is what turn one's going to look like. I'm simply going to move up the left flank. And take note that I'm not just hiding behind terrain to evade his raiders. I know his raiders are going to come out, and that's fine. They'll probably all be able to shoot. And if he has Ravagers, which, I mean, some Dark Eldar players take Ravagers as well, you know, they're going to be able to shoot too. And we're just going to kind of have to absorb that, to be honest, because if we don't, we're going to be stuck behind terrain the entire game, and they're going to have full control over the board. So we can't have that. We're probably going to have to sacrifice a Wave Serpent or 2 on the first turn just to get out of the way. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. We're going to move up near that structure right there on the left-hand side to basically take a strong position on the flank so that he can't take it away from us. And we're going to basically try to destroy his left flank. So after we move, we're positioned a little bit like this. So we have our heavier shooters behind the ruins still so that he cannot see us with the right side of his board. At least those units. So maybe we have fire prisms or something like that behind there. And we have our 3 wave serpents or, 3 wave serpents in front behind that structure. And we're just going to leave our rangers pretty much the same. They're probably just going to sit there and be there for a kind of objective-based goal. Now, what your enemy is going to do is he's probably going to try to respond to you by throwing all of his units towards that area of the board, towards the left-hand side of your flank. The problem with this on his end, though, is that basically what this does is it sets up a situation where he can no longer really surround you. His units on the right flank are out of position to be able to get a full surround on you, and they're actually putting themselves in a vulnerable spot with your own reinforcements. So I mentioned earlier that, you know, we weren't going to use that many reinforcements, and that's correct, but you're probably still going to have a few units tucked away to respond to, you know, any kind of units that he has coming in. So he's not going to really be able to get the same amount of control on the board now because you have chosen to move aggressively forward on the left. And honestly, he's not going to be able to hide his unit on the left, or else he's going to be in the same situation that you might have been in, which is he's going to be trapped on that side. So he's probably going to move out and engage you. Now, he can either do 2 things with his right flank. He can move towards the objective and just try to secure it. Or he can move to attack your left flank to try to protect his own side from getting collapsed. However, I've played this scenario a couple times. Usually what it is his infantry inside of the raiders aren't in range to shoot at you. So you're actually going to have the advantage in terms of firepower, and you're going to be able to easily take the left flank from them. 3 raiders is nothing too hard to destroy. They're very easy to kill, and typically they blow away like, kind of paper, so to speak. So once we do that, then the left flank is basically ours, and we can flip the board and turn it into a long ways battle. That means that we're mostly situated on the short end of the board. And it's going to be impossible, well, not impossible, but nearly impossible at this point for your opponent to surround you. And again, your fire prisms are now going to have, in the next turn, direct line of sight, basically, to his other raiders, which you can blow up the next turn. So essentially what we've done here is we've turned a situation that could have been very disastrous for us if we had stayed in a corner, and is now actually working against your opponent, because now he can no longer surround you and he's just lost his left flank. So again, I know Dark Eldar have some repositioning abilities themselves, but either way, even if he did see that coming and then repositioned his raiders away on the other side of the board, you're still going to not be surrounded. And that's the important part of this, is that you're preventing yourself from being surrounded and allowing the enemy to dictate the battle. Now, this is another way you can play it. If you do not like that kind of way of playing it, where you're flipping the board on your opponent and maybe you want to just try to secure both flanks, what you could do is you could do what I like to call a hammer and anvil, so to speak. Now, when I say that, I'm not literally meaning, the traditional hammer and anvil we think of, which is, a unit kind of holds another unit in place and then a hard-hitting unit comes and sweeps it up. I'm not talking about that specifically. What I'm talking about is holding one side of your flank while pushing on the other. So basically the setup's going to be almost the same. You're going to have 3 on each side. And this is just so that you don't give away anything to your opponent. You could redeploy things as you wish, as long as you still have pretty much an equal amount on both sides. I like to put my fire prisms on one side of the board where my transports are on the other. And a lot of you may be looking at this and saying, well, I don't really use a lot of wave serpents. And this tactic can be used with any unit that's semi-fast. And all of our units are quick, by the way. This could even be used with Wraith Lords. Wraith Lords are not that fast, but they're still movement 10. They're still decently fast. So this can be used with a lot of different units. It doesn't just need to be Wave Serpents. Although I will say that Wave Serpents are really tough units, and they're really useful, especially in games against faster opponents. Okay, so we have it set up like this. We have 3 on each side. We can redeploy kind of however we want, as long as, honestly, we have an equal number of units on both sides. Depending on what you want, you may want 2 fire prisms on one side, 1 on the other, or 3 wave serpents on one side, 3 fire prisms on the other, like I do. Whatever the case is, it doesn't really matter as long as you're balanced. So then what we're going to do is we're going to move up our 3 wave serpents, or whatever we got on the, our transports. We're going to move them up on the left side of the board. And this is why I like doing wave serpents on one side, because I like to protect my fire prisms the first turn. I move up my wave serpents, and basically, again, he's kind of in a similar situation now where he has to move forward, or else he's going to be trapped on the left side and he's going to dictate the battle, or we're going to be able to dictate the battle. So turn 1 after movement looks something like this. We have 3 wave serpents positioned to either capture objectives or shoot his models, whichever comes first. We're a little bit hidden behind the ruin, but we're not too much hidden. The reason why I hid them a little bit is because I don't want to be surrounded on that side and collapsed. But the good thing is we have units on the right that can respond very easily if that happens. And that kind of also acts as a deterrent to your opponent. So really the only thing he can do from here is he can either stay there basically and do nothing, because he doesn't have a lot of line of sight on units other than rangers, or he can move up to engage the wave serpents on the left-hand side of the field. Now, that's why I kind of left the wave serpents a little bit farther back, because I'm using the ruins on the left-hand side of my board to block a little bit of fire coming in from anything shooting on the right-hand side of the board, so his models. that are jumping over the ruin. So basically what he's decided to do is he's just decided, well, you know what? I'm going to move my right flank towards the center of the board. Well, I guess it would be our right, but he's going to move his raiders past the ruins near the crater in the center of the board to try to lock down the left flank and make sure that we can't push farther out on that side. However, this leaves him open to a lot of fire prism shooting on our right-hand side of the board. And basically this is just making your opponent choose between two kind of suboptimal choices. He doesn't really have line of sight on any of your key units. The only thing he can shoot at really right now is wave serpents. And wave serpents are designed to be shot at and to take a little bit of punishment. They will probably go down. I could definitely see a couple of them going down this turn, but you can still make an effort of killing those raiders on the right-hand side of the board very easily with the fire prisms. And on the left-hand side of the board, I mean, honestly, wave serpents are a lot more durable than you might think, and the units inside can be very effective as well and can probably take out a few Dark Eldar units. Kabalite warriors, witches, they're very good, but they're not as good as some of our aspect warriors. Striking scorpions, howling banshees can very easily rip through Kabalite warriors and honestly, even witches. Okay, now we've gone over two scenarios in which your opponent is trying to steal the flanks from you, but what about a scenario where your opponent is basically just trying to surround you, right? So he has a couple of drop pods in reserve. You know these are going to come in turn one. So what I like to do against this kind of thing is when I'm facing Space Marines and I see their forces laid out, he probably only has 2 units in reserve, which is his drop pods. At least in my experience, that's mostly the case. But we see here he's kind of set up to just take and hold the objectives, right? He has 2 rhinos with, you know, Space Marines inside ready to take the left-hand objectives on the left side of the board, and 2 on the right to take the right side objectives. Very basic setup here. Marines are very good at taking and holding objectives because of their durability and forcing opponents to come to them. So what we have here is a situation where he's going to try to surround our army right off the bat, and use his drop pods to come in and kill vulnerable targets. So what I've done here is I've actually deployed kind of like this to kind of maybe bait one of his anti-tank models to the flank. And this actually was a real game, and this worked. Basically what I did was I fielded 2 of my fire prisms on the right-hand side of the board, and he fielded his Redemptor Dreadnought on the right-hand side of the board as well to get some overcharged plasma fire on them. And to be honest, this probably would have killed one of my fire prisms if I had left them there. But my whole goal here was to bait one of his models on the opposite side of the board so that it wouldn't be in range on the first turn to be able to do any damage to me once I redeployed them. So, and again, this doesn't have to be a Redemptor Dreadnought, excuse me. They could easily be Eradicators. It could easily be, a Predator, stuff like that. Predators with last cannons aren't too popular anymore, but they're still pretty good in my opinion. Coming from my perspective, I think that they're not, I fear them less than the Eradicators, to be honest, but, they're not bad at taking out tanks. And your opponent might well have one. But, on the left-hand side, you can see that I've basically deployed my Rangers in sort of a half circle. And what this is this is basically just to deny his drop pods the ability to come in with Meltas. Basically, in my experience, if somebody's running drop pods, they like to put something with anti-tank weapons in them that are very, short range, like Melta guns or something like that. So this can be a problem for your tanks. Obviously, you don't want to lose your tanks to, basically these guys, these Melta guns coming out, whether they be Stern Guard or what have you. And honestly, when I was a newer player in past editions, I've lost a lot of models this way with drop pods. Drop pods are still very effective, in small numbers, I think, for dictating certain, things that your opponent can do, basically. So in essence, they're great at cornering an army, or, you know, kind of responding to different threats that your opponent might throw at you. So drop pods are still very effective, and you might see them in you know, quite a few lists when you're playing. So basically what I have here is I've, you know, deployed my rangers in a way to where he cannot deep strike into my area. So that means that he needs to be outside of 9 inches of those rangers, and he's not going to be within melter range. So what he's probably going to have to do is he's probably going to either wait and hold his, you know, guys in reserve for longer, or he's going to have to come in and just shoot rangers. If he holds his guys in for longer, that could be effective for him, but he's going to be losing on some long-term potential, and he's not going to have those models on the board for the first couple turns. So then let's go ahead and look at what my redeployment looked like. So I went ahead and I redeployed my 2 fire prisms to the left-hand side of the board, and I also redeployed my rangers a little better to make it, you know, a little bit, well, I mean, you know, a little bit harder for my opponent to get in. So then turn 1 comes along. Now, as I said, he could have easily kept his drop pods in reserve for a little bit longer. But in this particular game, he decided to just drop them in anyway at the end of his first turn. Now, I didn't move these models up, but he actually moved his rhinos up on the objectives, and he was trying to get a full surround on me. But the important thing is his units didn't really do any damage, except for a couple rangers. So he actually ended up killing 2 units of rangers. I still had 1 left. Actually, ironically, believe it or not, it was the unit in the ruins that actually survived. I didn't think they were going to, but he actually chose to draw line of sight to the unit on the right-hand side of the board, and he moved up and he iced them because they were out of cover. But, I mean, you know, the ones in the ruins actually survived. I was actually able in this game to break out of positions and destroy his stern guard that he dropped out. And then from there, he wasn't really able to respond too well to my fire prisms that I just kept on the left side of the ruin. I hid them from his Redemptor Dreadnought, and yeah, essentially that Redemptor Dreadnought was left alone on the corner for the whole game. It tried to move a little bit, but he was afraid that if he moved it too far, he might be moving it into threat of something else. So he decided to just kind of keep it in, you know, behind that ruin right there. He ran it behind the ruin to protect himself from the fire prisms. And it didn't do a lot for the rest of the game. Now, your opponent might not do that. Your opponent might know that you have Phantasm and might just say, well, you know what, I'm just going to deploy my Redemptor Dreadnought in a more versatile place so that I can then, you know, move him accordingly depending on how the battle goes. That might be what your opponent decides to do. But in any case, what you've done here is you've prevented him from using his drop pods to land a crushing blow on you turn 1 by targeting things like your fire prisms or important units. You know, I mean, jet bikes are also very important. You don't want to lose a unit of jet bikes turn 1, you know, to overcharged plasma cannons or anything like that, right? So in this way, you've prevented that from happening. And now your whole goal is, because, you know, your opponent's still going to try to hold those objectives from you and surround you. Your whole goal now is to push out from where you are on the left flank and take that side of the board, so that basically your opponent has to fight you on the long side of the board, just like we talked about in the first one, right? Because Space Marines, believe it or not, they don't do that bad of a job at moving around. They are a slower faction in general, but they're still fast enough to get to objectives, hold them, and then maybe, you know, move out from there to surround you if you're not careful. So from here, we're going to break out. And what I did in this game actually was I was able to essentially destroy, and again, this isn't representative of what I have on his side of the board. I just put I didn't illustrate it, but he had his rhinos move out from outside of the ruins to threaten the objective on that side. And basically what I did from there was I popped out of the ruins, I destroyed his rhinos and his Space Marines, and honestly, he didn't have a lot on the left-hand side of the board once I was done with my turn, and he was honestly a little bit upset that I redeployed the fire prisms. He actually said to me after the game that he forgot I had that, and that if he had his if he had his Eradicator Dreadnought on the left side of the board, I'd be in a lot of trouble. And I mean, he's probably right. I probably would have lost a unit, but by deploying in this way, we ensure that we can capture the left flank because we have a lot more points than him on the left flank. And that's exactly what happened. Basically what happened was he had about 1,000 points on the flank, and I had my whole army on the flank, right? So also in this game, I was running 3 fire prisms in this game. I did have quite a few reserves in the form of warp spiders and swooping hawks, and they were actually able to support me on the left flank in later turns. So whenever you're going against things like drop pods or, you know, very fast moving units, you do want to make sure that you screen out properly beforehand so that he can't one-shot you turn 1. And then what you want to do is you want to move out with your army and still be careful about his drop pods, because if he keeps them in reserve and chooses to come in later, they can still be an issue. So do take note of that. But essentially, at least you'll be safe on turn 1, where you don't have to worry about your fire prisms or important models dying right off the bat. And then at that point, your enemy is going to have total control because, you know, he's going to have eliminated several of your key models and your anti-tank ability. And let me tell you, if I had left my fire prisms open to attack, he would have done just that. And I wouldn't have been able to kill that many rhinos probably if I didn't have all 3 prisms. So it's just that one of the things that I think is hard for players is it's hard to memorize everything that everyone has, right? And I've been playing this game long enough to know what drop pods can do. And honestly, if you're just getting into the game and you're fighting drop pods for the first time, you might not know what that is. And that might seem, oh my God, there's nothing I can do against this because they come in turn 1 and they destroy my most important models turn 1. But there are ways of mitigating what deadly units from your opponent can do. And just like in this game, you know, not only did I screen my units out properly with Rangers so that they couldn't get drop podded, but I tricked and again, this is not going to happen against every opponent, but I tricked him into deploying, you know, something that he thought could kill a couple of my fire prisms on the right-hand flank, because he did have first turn. And he thought he could get a quick kill on him. And instead, that unit ended up getting trapped on the other side of the board, out of range of anything and out of line of sight. So again, I mean, this can happen, right? Your opponent can make that mistake. So, you know, there are things you can do to mitigate opponents from being able to play like that and try to surround you through good deployment, you know, redeployment, stuff like that, and strategies to be more aggressive on one side of the board. So in conclusion, against faster armies or armies that are deep striking to surround you and things like that, it's imperative to push out from your deployment zone and control the flanks, or your opponent's going to dictate pretty much every engagement. And this goes with Tau too, by the way. They can deep strike a lot of units with their battle suits and stuff like that on turn 2. They can come in and they're going to do a lot of damage. The best way to mitigate that is to put your expendable, well, not completely expendable, but to put units in their way so that they can't do that during their movement phase. So basically during your turn, set up a unit of infantry, whether it be, you know, Rangers or Dire Vengers or something like that, spread them out across so that they can't get that close to your important models. And then, you know, of course, redeployment and reinforcements also guarantee that you have the advantage on at least one of the flanks, and it also guarantees that you will be able to respond to his own reinforcements if he brings them in. So this allows you to kind of flip the board on your opponent. You know, like I said, if you take a flank and eradicate one of his flanks, we're now fighting a long ways battle in most cases, where you can just simply, you know, play basically a regular game against him and not have to worry about being surrounded. And then lastly, of course, screen your army from threats that are going to come in on turn 1, like draw pods. Units of Rangers are very good for doing this first turn. And you could use other units that are either in your Wave Serpents. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this with, units like Howling Banshees or Striking Scorpions, because they're a little more they're too valuable. You want those in combat. But units like Dire Avengers, you can definitely position them in certain ways so that they can still shoot at something and get some value, but also prevent your opponent from coming in too close to your Wave Serpents to be able to kill them. Or your Fire Prisms. Units like, for example, Crisis Battlesuits can come in and wreck your Fire Prisms no problem if they're allowed to. So using a unit of Rangers or Dire Avengers to screen out those units in the subsequent turns is still a very useful strategy, and honestly one worth considering highly. Okay, that's it for today's video. I hope you guys learned a little bit something about dealing with faster armies. Again, I've been playing this game for a while, and I've typically found these strategies to be useful in dealing with faster forces. But do let me know in the comments if you have anything to add, you have any unique tips or insights into fighting against faster armies. Again, typically I found that, faster armies want to control the outsides of the board, the flanks, to force you in, to surround you so that they can have, not only board control and have better line of sight on you, but also better objective control. So, but yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think. And yeah, that's it for today's video. I will see you guys later. I think the next couple videos we're going to have, I have a Samhain Craftworld video coming up this week. I also want to, at some point, create a video on Warlock Conclaves on foot, which was an idea from a subscriber. So yeah, we'll get into that later this week. All right, have a good one, everybody. Peace out. See you guys next time. Have a good one.